So we're going to continue on meat eating quality, and we're going to talk about Ozmeat. Ozmeat is a producer-owned company and joint venture between the Australian Meat Processors Corporation and Meat and Livestock Australia, which is another producer-owned company and is the industry body for the red meat industry. MLA is funded by producers paying a levy on sales of cattle, but it also does receive some government funding, mainly for research and development, and they've done significant amounts of research and development in both the sheep meat and beef, goat meat industry as well. Now, so these two own essentially this company. Now, under the Australian Meat and Livestock Industry Act in 1997, all export abattoirs must be accredited by Ozmeat. So Ozmeat are responsible for the quality assurance side of the red meat industry. In particular, they must license all export abattoirs, and you'd be fairly hard pressed to find domestic abattoirs, so that's local Australian, that aren't actually accredited with Ozmeat, because they have a set of guidelines and a set of standards which abattoirs need to follow. So this is the Handbook of Australian Meat online, and it's got some information here on the industry itself and the descriptors. It's also got information on the standard carcass trim requirements. So all carcasses that are killed and processed under the Ozmeat system must have the standard carcass trim, which is the head removed, the kidneys removed, skirt removed, the channel fat, the cod fat, etc. And this has been in place for over 20 years, and it's to ensure consistency. So this is some information about Ozmeat itself. Basically, it is responsible for developing the standards. So it's all about quality assurance, making sure that if you buy bulk, so wholesale meat, that it's been prepared in a standard way, it's been graded in a standard way, that you're getting a consistent quality product. And as I said beforehand, they accredit abattoirs, mainly, well, all export, and again, it would be difficult to actually find any domestic abattoirs that aren't. They audit, so they're responsible for monitoring as well. Now, Ozmeat have actually developed the national industry standard for language as such. So what they do is they've got basic categories of beef, so based on dentition, so that's the number of milk teeth or adult teeth that an animal has. Now, anything that's a milk tooth, so has no adult teeth whatsoever, is considered generally, if it's young, it's considered as a young animal. So veal, it says here that it's not allowed to weigh any more than 150 kilos, must have youthfulness and veal colour, and no secondary sexual characteristics, which is what happens under the influence of testosterone. The basic categories, again, for beef can be anything from a milk tooth to an 8 tooth, so that's an older animal, but it's female, or a steer, so castrate, that has any males don't have any sexual characteristics. And then bulls obviously will have secondary sexual characteristics, such as the big muscles on the neck, etc. They can actually further break this down into a bunch of other things as well. So you've got something like your young prime steers, and these are all to do with the different markets that they're actually going to go to, and we'll go into market specs later on. So this is a castrate, essentially. I mean, you would really find it an entire male that has no more than four teeth and has no evidence of secondary sexual characteristics and is up to 36 months old. Whereas a yearling steer up here is up to 18 months old, It again is usually a castrate most of the time, and it's a milk tooth compared to the young prime steer, which could be 0 to 4. Now, after an animal has been slaughtered and the carcass trim applied, it undergoes what's called chiller assessment, and this is where they use the Ozmeat language, which is a universal description of the types of beef based on a number of several quality characteristics. So that includes meat colour. So that's over here. So they need to grade, they use the colour cards to grade the longissimus dorsi, which is essentially the eye muscle. And I've got a diagram coming up that'll show you where that's located. It's in the back, in the loin area. And it grades it from sort of this pale colour to really dark colours. Now, the reason meat colour in particular is important is because consumers prefer cherry red meat rather than dark coloured meat, because dark coloured meat usually indicates poor meat eating quality, bruising, and what we call dark colours, which we've already been through. And obviously you've got veal here too, which shouldn't be any darker than the V5 here, but usually veal is paler, or the paler the better. The next thing's fat colour, so that's next to the ribeye muscle under the rib fat, and this, it can range from bright white, the problem with the end of the bottom here, so bright white through to your really yellow colours. And the yellow colours in particular are usually found in grass-fed beef, so animals that have taken in grass which has a lot of carotenoids in it, which are the same colour compounds as carrots and that sort of stuff. Now, that's masked in green plants by chlorophyll, because chlorophyll is quite green. It masks those reddy orangey colours, but they're still present. Now, some markets don't really like these yellow fats. They perceive that that animals with coloured fat are old or inferior or undesirable in some way. So, for example, the Japanese market prefers a soft white fat, so up this end, rather than your darker coloured fats here. Marbling is another thing that they measure, and they use, again, these, as you can see over here, there's these pictures that they use, and marbling is a measure of the intramuscular fat. So that's the fat that's deposited inside the meat itself, so inside the meat, rather than on the outside, as you can see in this rib fat measurement. Now, the purpose of marbling is what happens, the fat inside the muscle melts during cooking and lubricates the muscle fibres, and that's what gives it tenderness and juiciness and flavour. The majority of these really high marbling animals are more likely going to be Angus or a Wagyu type animal, and again, for a lot of the Japanese markets, that's what they're looking for. Now, the other thing they assess is rib fat. So that's this one here. Too much fat and it's wasteful, but you actually need a specific measurement. I think it's about 3 millimeters for, say, MSA grading. And what that does is it protects the really valuable primal cuts from drying out and getting cold too quickly, in that if they get cold too quickly, they'll actually shorten and go tough. So you need to have a minimum of fat. You can't have any, they'll cut anything else off. Maturity is also really important. So maturity is measured by ossification. Now what that is between the vertebrae and the ribs, usually there's like a cartilage type material. And what happens as the carcass matures, it will start to ossify, so bone will grow there instead of the cartilage between the vertebrae, and it can be a bit more of a reliable age determinant than dentition, because an animal that's hasn't been finished very well, so has a bit of a poor nutritional uptake prior to slaughter may not have erupted its first 2 teeth, for example, as a yearling, because of poor nutrition, but its carcass will show that it's older than what its teeth say. So that's to do with the maturity, and obviously if people are looking for young beef, then you're going to want less maturity. Eye muscle area is the last thing that they do, and that's to do with the size of the longissimus dorsi, which is that eye muscle, obviously, and it's to do with the carcass size as well. So the bigger the carcass, the bigger the primal cuts are going to be, the bigger the eye muscle is going to be. This is a diagram of the longissimus dorsi, so this red highlighted muscle here, which is a postural muscle, so it's basically responsible for flexing the body that way when it contracts. But it doesn't do a lot of work, which is why it's possibly the most, actually it is the most valuable cut on the whole of the animal, in the eye muscle, essentially here. So this is roughly where they do the assessment here in that muscle for all of those meat-eating quality traits. Closely linked is the Meat Standards Australia, which uses the AusMeat language plus a few other measurements, including the tropical breed content, the hanging method, hormonal growth promotants, pH and temperature, in order to, and hump height, in order to give the carcasses a grade. Now, if a carcass doesn't meet the MSA standards, so either it hasn't got enough fat depth, the fat distribution's wrong, the pH is above 5.7, or it hasn't got the right meat colour, specks, bruising, or there's been issues with the hide puller when they take the hide off, that it's ripped some fat off, then it's non-compliant and it can't enter the system. Now, it used thousands, tens of thousands of studies and panels on meat-eating quality, with getting consumers to taste test different cuts of meat and different cooking methods, etc., and came up with this grading system. And what it does is it generates an index based on all of the AusMeat measures, plus, as I said, the tropical breed content, the hump height, whether it's been through a sale yard, stress, that sort of stuff. What these indexes do is they it predicts the meat eating quality based on tenderness, juiciness, flavour, and overall liking of the beef. It's a number between 30 and 80, expressed to 2 decimal places, and it's a tool that people can use to improve their meat eating quality. So you can get feedback if you send your carcasses to a Meat Standards Australia licensed abattoir. But the most important thing is it's all about giving consumers access to premium or high quality beef that is guaranteed to be good eating quality, because there's nothing worse than going to the supermarket or the butcher and buying meat that you expect to be good quality and it's not, and it being inconsistent, which is one of the problems that lamb and pork are having at the moment. So Meat Standards Australia has either been graded, or they're graded as a 4-star if it meets a certain number of points, or if it's really, really high in points, then it meets a 5-star, which is supreme quality. And as well as grading these, grading the meat, they actually recommend a cooking method as well. So depending on what type of cut it is, they recommend a type of cooking method and how it should be prepared. Now, Woolworths, for example, has embraced this, so all their meat is MSA graded, and that just means it meets a minimum level of meat eating quality. Coles doesn't do it, Aldi does, but this is their quality assurance program, but it's available for all meat, or through accredited buyers and purchasers.